So, it's been 13 years. Anyone remember Avatar?
At the twilight of the year 2009, it slipped into theaters, innovated the 3D theatrical experience, dethroned Titanic as the highest-grossing film of all time, and then we spent more than a decade barely talking about it. I remember only seeing an extremely basic teaser trailer for this movie and walked into the theater with very few expectations. I walked out in a gleeful state and very satisfied with what I'd seen.
This was back in the day when YouTube channels used to look like MySpace pages. Weird, right? At the time, I had Avatar listed as one of my favorite movies, and now, all these years later, there are sequels coming.
To prepare for The Way of Water, I revisited Avatar for the first time in 10 or 11 years. I'll talk more about that in a bit, but to summarize, I still enjoy it, but the epic scale and spectacle is best experienced in a theater. That's true for most movies, but especially movies like this.
Like many of you, I have a never-ending list of media to consume, so I was initially dreading this revisiting because Avatar's runtime is 2 hours and 42 minutes. And that's just the theatrical version.
There's also a special edition and a collector's extended cut. All three versions are available on this Blu-ray set.
See, George Lucas, you could have tweaked your films without attempting to rewrite history.
I've talked about deleted scenes a couple times before. Getting a glimpse of what wasn't used in a movie always makes for an interesting conversation. But deleted scenes aren't always cleanly presented, which makes sense. If they aren't in the final cut, a studio's not going to invest money in finishing them. Avatar's bonus features include roughly an hour of deleted scenes, way more than I've ever seen for any other movie.
But extended cuts are a different story because everything in them is finished. Previously absent scenes are put back into the movie like a puzzle piece you didn't realize was missing until someone else pointed out the holes.
Inevitably, the conversation becomes, which is the best cut? Does one of the longer versions feel like the definitive way to watch the movie now? Or was the theatrical cut exactly as long as it needed to be?
And most importantly, am I the only person asking this question in 2023 because everybody else forgot about Avatar until a few months ago? The longer a movie gets, the more essential good pacing becomes.
It's not good when an audience loses interest or feels like a film is wasting their time. So it's important to relay information efficiently in a story. But movies are also an emotional experience, and sometimes the audience needs a mental break. So there have to be moments where things can settle down too.
Now take these principles and apply them to any movie that runs longer than the standard hour and a half to 2 hours. If an audience isn't feeling engaged, they might start to think, "Get over there!" If you want to avoid the audience getting restless while they wait for the good parts, you need good pacing. Which Avatar has.
There's plenty happening, but also plenty of moments for allowing the experience to sink in. Avatar's greatest strength is immersing the viewer in the world of Pandora, getting them to appreciate it the way the Na'vi do. It accomplishes that by investing plenty of time in Jake learning from the Omaticaya, as opposed to just cramming that whole arc into a quick montage and moving on.
Because again, efficient storytelling is worthless if you don't give your audience the chance to process the information and the associated emotions.
Part of why Avatar works is because its story is so easy to follow. Not as much brainpower is needed to keep up with what's happening, which frees our minds to think about the finer details or just get swept away by the amazing world. It's the ideal amount of mental stimulation, and when a movie achieves that, being too long starts to matter less and less. Remember that when Avatar came out, people clamored to see this movie not just once, but multiple times.
Going out to the movies can be expensive, and Avatar was heavily pushing the IMAX 3D experience. For people to pay for that more than once, it certainly must have felt worth it. So is it possible that an extended version of that film could make the experience even better? After Avatar's record-breaking box office success, it returned to theaters in August 2010 with about 8 minutes of extra footage. This cut was called the Special Edition re-release.
The new bits of footage are referred to as scenes on the Blu-ray. That's probably what they were called during shooting as well. But scenes feels like the wrong word. Most of them aren't new sub-chapters of the story, they're short clips that add 15 to 30 extra seconds to pre-existing sequences.
Scene 60 is one such clip.
It adds to the sequence of Jake and Neytiri running through the forest before Jake gets roped by the warriors. There's no new dialogue, just purple moss.
This movie's got scenery in spades. It doesn't really need more.
Then there's scene 81J, where Jake talks about how the Hallelujah Mountains can float. The question to ask here is, do you want a fictional phenomenon to be explained, or would you rather keep it a mystery? Personally, I didn't mind hearing about them, and the explanation ties into why radar and other electronic instruments have trouble functioning out there.
What makes this edition feel weird is that Jake is narrating.
Yeah, so what does hold them up? Grace explained it to me.
If this fun fact was part of the chatter on the helicopter, the pacing would have felt more natural because the characters were in motion. But as is, the characters have reached point B and are ready to get to work, only for Jake's narration to stop the movie for a few extra seconds. It's a bit awkward, and that's probably why it got cut in the first place.
The contribution from this next group of scenes also isn't much, but I kind of like what they do.
Scene 39. Grace points out a sternbeast herd.
Looks like the bow, a dozen cows, and some juveniles.
On its own, not very essential. However,
their introduction here foreshadows their inclusion in 2 more special edition scenes, which we'll get to later.
For playing support, Scene 39 gets a pass.
Scene 64 Alt 1 adds to the scene where Jake joins the tribe for their evening meal and awkwardly tries to socialize. I enjoyed this curious child waving at Jake before getting shooed away by one of their parents. Also, Neytiri gets to introduce herself by name.
You know, I don't even know your name.
Neytiri Tiskahamu Aite.
Getting a whole lot slower.
Neytiri.
Scenes 102 and 105 contribute to a 6-minute montage about an hour into the movie, showing off a new plant and more of those helicopter lizards. Excuse me, fan lizards. Yeah, I'm doing my research. Scene 112 takes place while Jake is on the way to rope his Ikran. Neytiri flies by on hers and Jake gives her a salute.
These clips also show us Neytiri being playful, which I think is adorable and deserves to be witnessed.
And since the scenery doesn't break the flow of the sequence, it actually feels like a bonus instead of an unnecessary distraction.
There's also a little bit of bonus violence in the final battle.
First, there's scene 282, where the Sternbeast wastes a couple of RDA soldiers in a way that makes you go, damn, that was brutal.
An essential element in making action scenes fun to watch.
Scene 332 adds a few more seconds of Neytiri fighting Quaritch.
Yeah, this time it's personal. Alright, now we're getting into the longer scenes with more significant contributions to the movie.
Scenes 44 to 45 show the schoolhouse where Grace used to teach Na'vi children before diplomatic relations collapsed.
The Omatikaya learned as much about us as they needed to.
The school does get enough mention in the theatrical cut, but this scene takes place pretty early in the movie and is a nice quick peek into Grace's background.
In scene 121 Alt 1, Jake and the Na'vi hunt Sternbeast. It's got an exciting vibe and is a good cliff note to Jake completing his training as a hunter.
Hell yeah!
Hell yeah!
It also directly precedes this line.
I was a stone-cold aerial hunter. Death from above.
Seeing the hunt heightens the impact of that line. And since the movie hasn't hit the climax just yet, it has room to throw in something that's just fun to watch.
And now, scene 151, the extended love scene. Jake and Neytiri kiss and grope each other a bit more, and even intertwine their cues. Yes, they're called cues.
When this got added to the movie, everybody was making jokes about ponytail sex. I did some research because of course this would be the thing that would require further study, and here's the scoop. The cues intertwining is not sex.
Jake and Neytiri are definitely having sex.
I'm with you now, Jake. We are mated for life.
But intertwining cues is not how the Na'vi reproduce. The cue is a bundle of tendrils connected to their nervous systems and is used to bond with the creatures and other aspects of nature on Pandora. But they are not reproductive organs, which is a relief. Equating every bond the Na'vi make with having sex would lead to questions I don't want to ask.
So with that cleared up, setting aside all the stupid jokes, is it beneficial to the movie? I'd say yes.
Consider prior examples of this sort of connection.
Feel her heartbeat, her breath. Feel her strong legs.
Two Na'vi bonding with each other adds complex thoughts, feelings, and emotions to the mix. I can understand why it's integral to mating because the Na'vi mate for life. Engaging in something so intimate and with such permanent implications requires a lot of trust and vulnerability.
Which makes Neytiri feeling betrayed by Jake even more heartbreaking.
With you. With you.
I trusted you!
Trust me now, please.
Look out there!
Next are scenes 174 to 176. After the Tree of Souls is bulldozed, the Na'vi destroy some mining equipment, and we see headcam footage of the aftermath.
6 bodies, that's all. The equipment's totaled.
I have mixed opinions about these clips.
In the theatrical cut, Jake and Grace get disconnected from their avatars, 5 minutes of screen time passes, and then they get one last chance to convince the Omaticaya to leave Home Tree. So as far as that version is concerned, the Na'vi just stood around for a while until Jake and Grace regained consciousness.
The Tree of Souls was sacred. The Omaticaya having a violent response to its destruction makes sense.
On the flip side, I think the film flows a little better if it saves additional violence until the attack on Home Tree, mainly because of this line.
I'll do it with minimal casualties to the indigenous. I'll drive them out with gas first.
If the Na'vi have recently destroyed equipment and killed people, it doesn't make as much sense for Quaritch to suggest the merciful approach.
It'll be humane. More or less.
This last pair of special edition scenes focuses on Sute, who is leading the Omaticaya after Neytiri's father was killed in the attack on Home Tree.
Scene 276 is straightforward. The short montage of the final battle going south now includes Sute landing on the ground after he falls.
Originally, seeing the fall was enough. We know this character is dead.
But in watching him land...
He's not quite dead.
Which brings us to scene 348.
A mortally wounded Sute tells Jake to lead the Omaticaya, then requests that he end his life.
I will not kill you. This is the way.
I like this because it offers a more definitive ending to Sute's storyline and his relationship arc with Jake.
It also shows his desire for an honorable legacy.
I fought with Toruk Magdo, and he was my last shadow.
Jake starts saying last rites. The camera moves up, light floods the frame, and we crossfade to the film's ending.
I like these clips, but in the spirit of less is more, does the theatrical version present itself better?
In that version, this is the scene right before the ending.
I see you.
I see you.
They've won. They're safe. They're together. That is the tone that's carried into the ending. Joyful and triumphant. Sute's death preceding the ending gives it a bittersweet note. But since it serves the character well and is very cleanly edited back into the movie, I don't mind its inclusion.
I'd say this one comes down to personal preference. I favor the theatrical version, but only by a hair. The Collector's Extended Cut first released in November 2010 as part of this Blu-ray set.
It's basically the special edition cut plus yet another 8 minutes of new footage, bringing the total runtime to just under 3 hours long.
While there weren't as many new sequences added to this version, they were more substantial. Exhibit A, the alternate opening.
The theatrical version started with Jake emerging from cryo, and included brief flashbacks to some of these scenes. Now we get to see them in full, as well as Jake's life on Earth.
Let's get it straight up front. I don't want your pity. You want a fair deal? You're on the wrong planet.
Basically, it's an uncut opening that shows the events in chronological order. It adds 3.5 minutes to the runtime, so the benefits better be good.
For some first-time viewers, seeing things in chronological order might make it easier to follow along. Furthermore, it's stated a few times that Earth is in bad shape.
See the world we come from. They killed their mother. And they're gonna do the same here. The aliens went back to their dying world.
So getting to see Earth might help to reinforce that a little bit, right?
I also really like this transition from Tommy's body being cremated to Jake waking up in cryo 6 years later. It's unfortunate that there wasn't really a good way to use it in the theatrical cut.
But even if these clips are neat, the theatrical version is more efficient and does a better job at hooking the audience.
This cut takes an opening that's already easy to follow and well-paced, and extends it 3.5 minutes. Remember what I said about pacing and how this movie offers just the right amount of mental stimulation? This alternate opening is too slow.
Meeting Jake before the story begins isn't as compelling as getting to know him alongside it.
Seeing him emerge from cryo sparks curiosity, and most of our immediate questions are answered pretty quickly, which gets us hooked. The story gets told efficiently without overwhelming the audience with information.
As for the new clips of Jake Sully's angst,
You Jake Sully? Step off, you're ruining my good mood.
they are not without value.
But the opening act of the movie shows plenty of Jake's bitterness.
The PhD who trained for 3 years for this mission?
He's dead. I know it's a big inconvenience for everyone.
What was going through your head?
Maybe I was sick of doctors telling me what I couldn't do.
So are these clips important enough to warrant their inclusion?
While I do appreciate watching Jake beat the crap out of a guy abusing his girlfriend, it's not the kind of thing that makes me think, wow, now I can't imagine the movie without this. And that line of thinking applies to most of the new opening.
With the next pair of scenes, judging by that standard is a bit more complicated. Scene 69A has Grace mentioning Neytiri's sister, Silwanen.
Just amazing girls.
I got a date with Silwanen, too.
She's dead.
Ugh. I don't think I need to explain why that got cut.
Its inclusion in this cut feeds into scenes 106 and 109, where Grace finally tells Jake in detail what happened to her school.
Neytiri's sister, Silwanen, stopped coming to school. She was angry about the clear cutting. They had set a bulldozer on fire. They killed Silwanen in the doorway, right in front of Neytiri.
This scene gives a very strong impression of why Pandora and the Na'vi are important to Grace.
I put 10 years of my life into that school. They called me Sa'anuk. Mother.
This scene is extremely significant for Grace's character, which is why it kills me to say that its placement doesn't fit the flow of the movie.
In the other two cuts, the montage sequence uses this clip
All energy is only borrowed, and one day you have to give it back.
to segue into Jake hunting a creature and paying respects. Then this
A clean kill. You're ready.
transitions to the hunter's rite of passage.
In short, the montage is thematically consistent and flows really well. Adding Grace's backstory requires janking with the montage and interrupting a seamless transition.
One could argue that Jake waking up in his human body makes a decent cutoff point for the montage, and that this conversation is a good interlude until the movie is ready to move on.
But now let's set aside the integrity of the montage and focus on Silwanen.
Scene 69A is there to ensure she gets mentioned. Paired with the scene of the ruined schoolhouse, it's decent foreshadowing to make sure Grace's backstory has the proper impact. That said, Silwanen is only mentioned, never seen, so the emotional potential for her role is limited. Neytiri was Grace's student as well, but they hardly interact with each other, so that connection doesn't come into play either. In conclusion, even though I really enjoy Grace's backstory, there are a few good reasons not to have this scene in the movie.
Anyway, I've waffled long enough about that. It's time for the final clip. Scene 178.
You know, they never even wanted us to succeed.
The fact that it took 2 extended cuts of the movie for this dialogue to get used is a severe oversight.
In the first 2 cuts, we see a clip of Grace drinking, and then suddenly Jake gets fired up.
This is how it's done.
Not to say Jake's spiel on the military-industrial complex came out of nowhere, it makes sense in context, but using Grace's dialogue as a springboard for that statement makes it so much better.
When people are sitting on shit that you want, you make them your enemy. And then you're justified in taking it.
It also pairs well with scenes 174 to 176, which makes their inclusion feel more worthwhile.
In fact, one line is actually directly tied to those scenes.
They bulldozed a sacred site on purpose to trigger a response.
But if you were to cut out that line, you could disregard those scenes.
They never even wanted us to succeed. They're just fabricating this war to get what they want.
This is how it's done.
And now it works for the theatrical version too.
In full, this clip adds about 12 seconds to the movie. With the middle bit cut out, only 6.
A minimal amount of time that really improves the scene. As far as I'm concerned, scene 178 should never have been cut. Choosing the best cut was a little bit tricky, mostly because as I was watching these different clips, I was making an edit in my head by cherry-picking my favorite bits. So just for fun, here's what I would keep if I were in charge of making an extended cut. But of course, I promised a verdict on the official versions.
Many of the special edition scenes are easy enough to slip in without disrupting the flow of the movie in a negative way, even if what's added isn't very necessary. Meanwhile, despite how significant some of its contributions are, there are mostly good reasons for why the material in the collector's cut was removed in the first place.
With the exception of scene 178, everything included exclusively in the collector's cut comes with question marks attached. So in terms of extended cuts, the special edition wins. But how does it stack up against the theatrical version?
Though I do think there are a few scenes that shouldn't have been included, the special edition largely succeeded in its approach. Viewers were given new things to appreciate from early in the story right up until the ending. It worked in small touches rather than broad strokes, so it didn't disrupt things about the movie that already worked.
With deleted scenes or extended cuts, I enjoy them most when they add layers to the characters or the story, which the special edition does a couple of times. But I also have to step back and remember what Avatar means as a movie to general audiences.
The visual spectacle of Pandora was a highlight of the experience. Even if I think extra scenery is redundant, having new eye candy is not necessarily a disappointment. And considering most people seeking an extended cut will have already seen the original version, pacing, flow, and synergy with other parts of the movie might not matter as much on repeat viewings. Because that's the thing about nerds. We may enjoy picking movies apart, but sometimes we just like to see extra stuff from that movie.
So if you're jonesing for a little more Avatar, I'd say the special edition is worth your while. Or, if I ever get the gumption to assemble it, you could watch my extended edition. This is Detective Steve, signing off.